Greetings. So today I want to tell you about the latest expedition of the California Sea Cave Survey. This was a survey of sea caves along the California coast and islands, started back in 1982. And certainly the highlight over the years has been the surveys out in the California Channel Islands. For a while I had my own boat for this survey, but since the 90s I've done, and having sold the boat, I've done only a handful of trips. These have typically been on friends' boats or boats we've chartered. And this report is on our most recent expedition aboard a 35-foot catamaran. So there are 8 Channel Islands off the coast of Southern California. Los Angeles is down here off the map. Santa Barbara, Ventura are on that section of the California coast where it goes due east-west. So 5 of the 8 Channel Islands comprise Channel Islands National Park. We've actually explored sea caves in all 5 of these islands, but by far most of our work is concentrated on Santa Cruz and Anacapa. And in fact, I produced books on these 2 islands caves, the one on Santa Cruz back in 1988 and the one on Anacapa back in 1993. So for a closer look at Santa Cruz Island, we have a Google Earth view that shows the 24-mile long island. As you can see from this, it's a fairly mountainous island. There isn't a lot of flat land on it, other than in various marine terraces that you get, such as here on the east end and over on the west end here, paleo marine terraces. So a little mini geology, this island is actually made up of mostly of Miocene age volcanics. And these extruded out under the underwater actually back in the Miocene epoch, about 25 million years ago. And then 2 to 5 million years ago, an uplift occurred that exposed all this new rock above sea level. And in the process of uplifting, produced a score of faults. And it's along most of these faults that the sea caves are formed. Closer look at the geology, and one thing you can see that's very striking is the difference between the north side of the island and the south side. This long division here along the in this great central valley is a fault, and the island is actually composed of 2 types of rock. Mostly all Miocene volcanics, but the volcanics on the north shore tend to be andesite, very solid basalt that forms large cliffs and makes for a very good host rock for sea caves. On the south shore, we have different sort of Miocene volcanics that have been sort of glued together by the faulting process. This rock tends to be a tuff and a breccia. So it's a bit softer than this rock on the north coast and more varied. Here's an example of some of the very highest cliffs on the island. These are on the far west end. And you notice all the indented coves, and each one of these coves is formed along a fault. And in this area has a cave at the back of each one of these coves. So our crew for this trip were both newcomers and old hands. We had a mix of Texans and other Western cavers. So we have Charlie Savas came from Texas, along with Carolyn Fucinato on her first trip. Phyllis Bonneau came out from New Mexico. Our skipper was Nancy Pistol, and Matt Oliphant was our first-hand those two live in Southern California down in LA. So it was a pretty short trip for them to the harbor. And myself crouching in the doorway here was the organizer of the trip. But Nancy was, in fact, our skipper and in command once we left land. Closer view of the boat we rented, the Katy Lou. It's a 35-foot catamaran. Here's another view of it. It's roomier than it looks because it's much wider than a standard sailboat. So we had lots of room to store our gear, and we had basically 4 separate cabins. So a closer look at the island and with more names for features, and I'll be using this map periodically as we do our trip around the island. But the island is divided, its ownership is divided between the National Park Service and the Nature Conservancy. The Park Service has a lot of rules about some of the caves. Some of the caves are off limits for landing. The Nature Conservancy follows the general rules of California, i.e. Anything up to the low water line is accessible to anyone, basically. But to land on the island in the Nature Conservancy property, you need a permit, which is just a matter of purchasing one for $25 or so. So on this trip, we motored over, couldn't really use the sails, and we started at Scorpion Anchorage. Scorpion is one of my favorite anchorages. It's got these 2 small islets that are completely riven with caves, and lots of caves along the cliffs in this area. And you're seeing Anacapa over here in the distance. And this is actually taken not from a drone, but from a Park Service trail that goes out onto Cavern Point and affords this great view of Scorpion. So we began our first day of scouting here. I had some leads, and the kayaks that we brought along are very useful for checking on such things. You have to really land in each of them to really figure out what they're doing, unless it's just too radical. But not far from the last picture, we saw this crevice, and it was the surf was coming in pretty good, but it was kind of diminished by these rocks in the entrance. So Matt and Nancy poked in with their kayaks, and we decided we didn't want too many kayaks in there because they couldn't take them back in the cave, but it was too narrow. But so they left them in a small chamber here where they kept getting bashed around, and hence we named the cave Bashed Kayak Cave. And it was surprisingly long, 532 feet, and that's basically true linear distance. So this is not a small cave. While they were surveying, the 3 rest of us, Charlie and Phyllis and I, went scouting to other entrances, and also ended up working on getting some photos of known caves. That was definitely a part goal of this trip. Another entrance we found not far from Thrash Kayak is Pelican Rock Cave, which you can guess why we named it that. So after getting done with Bash Kayak, Matt and Nancy went over and did a quick survey of this cave. It wasn't especially big, and the surf didn't make the job easy, but they managed to get her done, which is what I can always count on those guys to do. And so here we are back at Scorpion. This is the cave-studded rock, and it's also a very popular landing spot for the Park Service. So here's a young lady on a paddleboard who's started out from the docks over there and poking around. So we made our anchorage here for the night. It's a great place to watch a sunset. You can see through one of the caves there. We had a full moon, which is always nice out on the islands for the evenings, and also happens to be when some of the tides are the lowest during full moons and conversely during new moons. So next morning we awoke to sunrise over the Anacapas, and we took off along the south shore of the island. So our general plan was going to be to do a complete circumnavigation of the island. And one advantage of that is that we would be coming back along the north coast with the west swell behind us. So Willows is an anchorage that we visited before. There's a few decent caves there, but we had a few more leads just further on. So we decided to go and poke into those for the day. So this was a totally new find. And it turned out to be a nice chamber, very pleasant. We just landed on a beach with our kayaks and traversed along the cliffs. It had this curious feature, a tide pool that would periodically gurgle, and probably it's very much a micro blowhole where the surf action is moving air in a cavity underneath. Here's a panorama of the interior of the cave, and you can see here a contact between two different layers of this tuff and breccia, and in context with the entrance. So pretty much a dry cave at low tide, and what you see is what you get. It made a fairly quick mapping effort. Curiously, there was a freshwater spring in the cave, so this may well have been known to the Native Americans who lived out on the island. So we ended up with another evening at anchor, and this time at Willows Anchorage, which is, again, a very fine anchorage with a nice little cave that you can access by landing on a beach. And moonrise over the anchorage. And we jumped from moonrise to sunrise the next day. So as we continued along the south coast of the island, we had some other leads that we had never checked before. This one is Gull Island, which on Google Earth I could see had what looked like several cave entrances in it. But the seas around it were too rough and nothing looked that enticing on it. So we continued further west to Kenton Point, which a friend had scouted and said, oh, there's lots of cave openings over there. So we looked, and these were the most obvious, and probably the second arch here may well hide a cave to the right of it, I think. But it was pretty rough out at sea, so we began a kayak excursion, but realized landing would be problematic. So we bagged it, but meanwhile noticed these curious features up above this stretch of coast. And I'm tempted to come back sometime and see if we don't have some soil pipe caves that extend underneath these canyons. So continuing further west, there's Kenton Point, where we were just looking at, to a prominent point and anchorage on the west end of Santa Cruz, Forney's Cove. And Forney's is a nice protected anchorage, and Fraser Point is the most prominent feature there. Here's a Google Earth view, and I had definitely noticed in the past what appeared to be an arch that was going through this point. So we were figuring we at least had something worth mapping there, and I had certainly seen lots of other entrances in this area. So we landed, the tide was already getting quite low, as you can see from all the seaweed covering the rocks. And Always interesting to see what's washed up on shore in these different areas. Boat wrecks have even been, we've even found them in some of the sea caves. So they end up where they end up and can endure quite a while. Lots of birds on the island. I'm not sure what this white seaweed is. It may well just be salt deposits on green seaweed. One of the denizens, a striped shore crab. So we took a hike out on Fraser Point to scout the cliffs for caves. And this is a panorama showing the full length and width of Fraser Point. So a lot of things require climbing down the cliffs. And these were some of the leads we spotted, but the conditions just weren't right to get into. And it's an interesting area geologically. There seem to be several types of volcanics over in this area, especially this striking red rock. It's a small islet off of Fraser Point that definitely seems to have a couple sea caves. But this was our main objective, what appeared to be an arch. And I figured, oh, well, this is probably worth mapping because it's probably at least 100 feet through. So we got the whole team over by just climbing down the cliffs to the entrance. And sure enough, you could see it cuts through the point to the other side. Nice scenic entrance with the looking back along the southeastern shore of the island. And it was a fairly easy walk through, but we were struck by there being an awesome tide pool in the middle of this thing. And for those that don't know their West Coast sea life, you've got a lot of sea urchins on the bottom. One reason I like to wear very stout footwear when sea caving, because you don't always have the benefit of such clear water. Lots of red and yellow sponges. And this purple was a red algae that always forms underwater and shows where the tide level is. Another view of the same tide pool. This is another little side passage, and you can see in the purple areas, again, all this purple area would be underwater at high tide. This is why we time our trips to coincide with the lowest tides we can find. Well, on the other side, the cave got a lot more interesting. You sort of popped around a corner and found, oh, well, there's more to this cave than an arch. There's actually a whole room over here with 2 more entrances. 2 more entrances, but some gnarly surf coming in. So work had to be done quickly and efficiently. And then there was yet another small passage that extended in. And you can see this would not have much room in it at a higher tide level. And most of what you see here are barnacles, so not the smoothest thing in the world if you're being bounced around by waves. This is a giant keyhole limpet, and another striped shore crab, and various white sponge and orange, or rather red sponge, and probably yellow boring sponge. So Fraser Point Cave definitely ended up being our most impressive and longest cave in terms of volume and just in terms of overall interest. Excellent maps by Nancy Pistol. And we reach the entrance as the sun is getting low and the tide is coming in. And this is our evening sunset at Fraser Point. So on our final days, we rounded West Point, which is always an interesting sail because it tends to be very rough there. And most of our efforts along here ended up being photographic because with a west swell coming, some of our best leads along the west shore proved to be a bit dicey for entry. So one of my photographic goals, and always nice to show newcomers this cave, is Painted Cave, which is our biggest cave on the island, 1,227 feet long to be exact. It's got a very scenic entrance. As you can see, it's actually big enough we could take this whole boat in there, but we wanted to return it in one piece. So kayaks always seem better. And plus we like to keep any, even though people can take motorized craft in, I like to avoid doing that because it leaves fumes, and seals and birds live in this cave and it doesn't seem like a very good thing to do to them. So mainly what I wanted to do here was to redo a shot in the dark inner chamber. Not so much redo a shot, but take one from a different angle. So the first 600 feet or so are big and well lit because the sun penetrates pretty deeply. And you see a lot of colors on the wall that gave rise to the cave's name, but it was one time even speculated, oh, these are Indian paintings or something, but no, they're just algae of different colors and probably some lichen growing on the rocks as well. So paddling back, the ceiling gradually lowers and you get to this low spot that opens up into what is virtually a dark chamber. In fact, this is now a flash shot, and on the right, or rather the left, you see a white area, and that's where sunlight is hitting. You can see the reflection off the wall here. That's where the sun hits this inner room, and that's as much as it lights up normally, and it's a big open room. And this is looking back into the depths of the room. That right now the tide is pretty high, and these shelves back here have got seals on them, and it's very typical to find seals in this cave. Not so many at this time of year, which is why we like to go in the fall. Same thing with the birds. There's fewer issues with nesting birds in the caves then, but this was the shot I was after, was to get off on a ledge and pop some flash bulbs off, getting a view of the back end of the room. So several years before, I had done a shot where I had landed on those seal shelves at a lower tide level and shot out. So for perspective, this is the wall where in between the kayakers there, where the sun comes in and hits. And this is all a flash shot. And interestingly here, you can see this diagonal line and then this other basically right angle curve here that represents where the two faults intersect that form this room. So in a lot of cases, when faults intersect, you tend to get bigger cave chambers. Using just some underwater flash in this shot. So we continued further east to another one of my favorite anchorages, Cueva Valdez. And this is named for a cave at the anchorage that's very prominent. Actually, the only other named cave besides Painted Cave historically, although the Spanish called it Tres Bocas for reasons I'll show you in a minute. This is just a big shelter cave on one side of the anchorage. Cueva Valdez is over here, and Green Grotto, which we'll also take a look at, is over here. So this was a cave we mapped earlier, actually way back in the early 80s, one of our first trips, we mapped this cave. So you land there from a seaward entrance. And once you're inside, the cave is T-shaped, and you can walk out either side. Here's a view I did actually several years earlier, looking back out the entrance and looking in on another side passage. This is the side passage. Here we see a contact between two of the rock layers. Again, more of the volcanics. More of the agglomerate and andesite. This is a contact. Green Grotto was another cave that I had always thought was photogenic, but had never really taken the time to shoot. The entrance is near this cool mushroom rock. And one of the entrances going in. This is the reason we call it the Green Grotto. It's got underwater openings, much like the famed Blue Grotto of Capri. And just some of the life inside. This is more of these giant limpets going out the second entrance. And there was always more scouting to do, so we continued on to Fry's Harbor, further east. And we found a couple caves that look like they'll be worth a survey, but nothing we can take a kayak into, and probably need an even lower tide. So the last cave we did photos in was Fry's Harbor. Not your biggest cave, but as you can see, kind of a scenic little cave. Lots of nice color. Pretty water. And Fry's made a good final night anchorage for us. However, we always like to end with a sunset. So here is sunset at Cueva Valdez, showing the two main entrances. And that concludes our show. Thank you.